Hey guys, and welcome to the video. So here today we're going to cover two subjects fairly quickly. Number one, being able to downgrade your firmware, because there's a lot out there buzzing around regarding you being able, for example, to be on 7.51 firmware and then being able to downgrade to 6.72. And then we're going to talk about backporting of games that are, let's say, running on 6.72 firmware, or they require 6.72, but being able to work on 5.05, and then games that are above 6.72 being backported to work on 6.72 firmware. So this shouldn't take very long. Don't forget to like the video, guys, because you know it goes a long way to support the channel and our efforts. But also, most importantly, even though some of the information I'm going to cover here with you today may not be what you want to hear, or might be, you know, bad news, remember to still like the video because it supports bringing you this information, and that's what's important, to keep you informed whether it's something good or not. So let's go ahead and let's get started. Alright, so let's start off with the downgrading of the PS4, because of course this came out and everyone said, oh, we can downgrade our PS4s now. No, you can't. So I'm going to try and keep this in layman's terms so that way everyone can understand it, because yes, there is a possibility that you can downgrade, but this is only applicable to certain people. For starters, this method is extremely complex. As it states here, this is something that is pointless for the ETA 1 kids because they need HW skills. I don't know if that means hacking writing, or more than likely I think it means hard wiring, because I read somewhere else that in order to make this work, you do need to solder some stuff on your PS4. So in addition to that, you also need to have just general developer skills. You need to have, you know, that level of intelligence and common sense and logic, and be able to deal with problems and issues, and have the foresight, as it says here, to copy everything, and a lot more stuff that goes with having those dev type skills in order to be able to do this. So this is definitely complex. It's not for the average end user for sure, especially if it requires soldering. Now, on top of that, if you manage to successfully do this, what this does is that it creates a backup of the firmware that you are on now. So in other words, if you were on 6.72 and you got backups running and you got payloads, and you know your 6.72 has been hacked and everything is great, and then you accidentally update to 7.51 or whatever the current firmware is, you can go back to 6.72 because you created this backup. The thing is that these backups are locked to your system, because every PS4's encryption keys are different. So if you were to successfully do this, you can't share it with anybody, because if you tried to, it wouldn't work on their system because they have a different set of encryption keys in their PS4. So this only works if you successfully did it on a lower firmware. And now that you're on a higher firmware, you can go back to the lower one because you created the backup for your system. So that's why this is not going to work for anybody else except you, but you had to have done this first successfully. So if right now you have a PS4 that's on 702, 750, 751, or a more updated firmware, unless you did this on a lower firmware, you're not going to be able to downgrade. You can pretty much forget about it. Alright, so even here at PSX Place, one of the developers who has been around the various scenes for years and years, and I actually communicated with him multiple times when I was working on some of my projects. It's Pinky, and he's retired. He does state here also that unfortunately all that must be done, or all of this must be done before updating, so it's largely worthless. So when he says that, he means, well, if you're already, for example, let's say on 6.72, you can just do the update blocker and then not have to worry about updating. Now I can maybe understand that someone maybe forgot to do that and then they updated by accident and they want to come back down, or maybe for, I don't know, some kind of reasons that a developer has why they would want to go to a higher firmware and then be able to come back down. But again, this is something that can only be done on that system. So long story short, for all you people out there, if you have a PS4 that is above 505 or above 672, you will not be able to downgrade. The only way you'll be able to do it is if you successfully did this backup method of a lower firmware while you were on that lower firmware on your specific system. If you didn't, you're out of luck. Oh, and one last thing I have to mention about this before we move on to the backporting of games is that if this is done successfully on a system that has been hacked, like 6.72, and then you update on that system to, let's say, a more updated firmware like 7.51, that doesn't mean that the 751 is going to automatically become hacked also, because the exploit does not work on 751. It only works on 6.72 or whichever one it was designed for. So that doesn't mean that, you know, you'll be able to go up to a higher firmware and now that higher firmware automatically becomes hackable. That's not how it works either. All right, now let's talk backporting of games. Is it possible to backport games to work on 505? Yes, especially now. The ones that you can backport are the ones that require firmware that is above 505, but at or below 6.72. All of those can be backported to work. Not every time it's going to work, even if you do it right, but there should be a high level of success rate that it would work. However, I can tell you right now, and I'm starting to see a bunch of games being dumped, that most of them are just being left on their whatever required firmware is, because since we have that 6.72, even though it is unstable, they'll work on it. There are some games that have been backported to 505 though. But anyway, there's a link here. I'll leave all this stuff down in the description. You can scroll down a bit. You can come here to the paste bin link, and when you do, then it'll bring you here. And as you can see, in order to be able to backport a game, it's not something that just requires, you know, a simple copy and paste. You need to obviously have some dev skills in order to be able to do this. Now, can a game that is above 6.72 be backported to work on 672 or 505? Well, yes and no. All right, so there are two methods in which this would work. Number one is that the game has leaked, and I'm going to use Final Fantasy VII demo as an example here. When that leaked, it was leaked from a server, but in addition to that, it wasn't just the game that leaked or the demo. When it leaked, it happened to have the passcode to get into the package file with it. That's one. And secondly, the keys to decrypt the binaries happened to be there as well. So it was the perfect storm, and that's why, because you had those keys that were able to decrypt the binaries and you had the passcode that let you into the package file, then it was able to be backported. This is something that is extremely rare. It happened with Final Fantasy VII demo, maybe a couple of other games or 3 or 4 games, but that's about it. It hasn't happened with, you know, a ton of games, just a few. So that's one way that the game leaks, and it leaks with all the passcodes and keys you need to be able to decrypt it. The second method is that you have a higher jailbroken PS4. So let's use The Last of Us 2 as an example, because I've been seeing some clickbait videos and some BS floating around that it works on 6.72. It requires 750 firmware. If you have a PS4 that is jailbroken on 750, you would then be able to dump the game. Because you can dump the game, then you can go ahead and backport it for it to work on 6.72 or maybe even 505. That's pretty much it. So unless the higher firmware game falls under one of those two things, that it was leaked with the encryption keys and with the passcodes, or someone out there has a higher exploited and WebKit exploited PS4 that meets the minimum firmware requirement of that game or higher, then yeah, if it doesn't meet one of those two things, it is just not going to work. And those are the only two ways right now that I know of that exist where a game can be backported. So more than likely, all these videos and things that you're seeing about games above 672 being able to work on this new 672 exploit are just clickbait BS. Either that or somebody legitimately has a higher firmware jailbroken PS4. But I'm pretty sure it's not the last one, so I bet all of my money on that it's just clickbait BS. And that is it, guys. We're going to go ahead and wrap it up. If you found anything in this video useful, informative, helpful in any way, shape, or form, or you just want to throw some love or appreciation to the channel, don't forget the best way to do any of that is just to hit that like button, maybe subscribe if you haven't already. Much love going out to everybody out there. Please be careful, guys. Be safe, but have fun, and we will see you on the next one.